It's all a fallacy. It's a fable. The New World Order powers have painted a picture that there's been a recovery, and the only recovery going on is in their own brokerage accounts as they've pilfered trillions.
Well, it's reached a point of absurdity that I literally ran out of adjectives to describe it in my own writing a couple of years ago. So I had to switch to start looking for allegories and metaphors. So the first one I seized upon was the Matrix, because that was about the only metaphor I could think of that was extreme enough to, describe the fantasy world we're living in. But of course, as things have gotten even more insane, I've had to go beyond that. And so now the metaphor I'm using is the Wonderland Matrix. It's not simply like the Matrix of the movie. It's a crazy version of the Matrix, where the world the drones are plugged into is totally insane. Because in the movie version of the Matrix, they live in a normal world. It's a sane world that makes sense to the drones themselves. But, our Matrix is a totally nutty place. It's a through-the-looking-glass fantasy world that makes no sense whatsoever to anybody, as you say, that has their eyes even slightly open.
Yeah, and the Wachowski brothers who did that movie were certainly ahead of their time, and they opened up a lot of people's eyes to the possibilities of maybe what the future New World Order's plans are. We know the Pentagon would love to roll out what you saw in that movie as they work on their autonomous drones and their autonomous robots and their self-aware robots that are militarized. And I'm not overstating that. That truly is their plan if we allow it to unfold. If the people stand down and the robots take over under the control of the Pentagon, you're going to look back at what we have today as an Eden compared to what's coming. And, you're right, Jeff. The Matrix is a great metaphor for what's going on because so many people that we meet and talk to don't want to know. When you start to tell them what the banks did and when you start to tell them about the real state of the economy, they say that's doom and gloom. Why can't you ever talk about good news? You're such a doom and gloomer. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want to be unplugged from the Matrix.
They want to take the blue pill.
Yeah, that's right. They want to stay in the Matrix because the Matrix is warm and comfy and you don't have to worry about the big bad boogeyman. You can worry about stuff like the Santa Barbara shooter, and you can worry about stuff like the Sandy Hook shooter, and you can worry about those sort of peripheral issues that the New World Order's media wants to tell you about, because the New World Order's media will not tell you about Bilderberg Group, and they will not tell you about the New World Order Pentagon plans for more war, more drones, less freedom, less liberty, and more tyranny.
And I should admit, I can't totally take credit for coming up with the Matrix allegory, because one of the very first members who began posting regularly on our forum gave himself the username Red Pill.
Yeah.
So, that Matrix history goes back on our site a long time.
Well, it's ubiquitous now with freedom and liberty, and, it's ubiquitous with standing up against the powers that be and against the tyranny. And it has become part of the fabric of the contrarian culture, the libertarian culture, the anti-tyranny culture, is this allegory or this metaphor of the Matrix, because it's never been more clear. It wasn't clear to me when I watched that film when it came out. I wasn't awake then.
No,
I understood it. I understood it as it pertained to the narrative of that movie, but I didn't understand the narrative as it pertained to my own life. But I understand it now. And I've often said, and I just said it in our most recent interview with Bix Weir, this is a language that new people to whom this information is new, this is a language they do not understand. They go into defense mode and they come out with things that they've heard, talking points they've heard from the Michelle Melkins and the other Mockingbird media puppets on both the right and the left, that we are tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy nuts. That's the label. That's their fallback. That's their defense mechanism, because they don't want to face the horrifying truth. They don't want to take the red pill.
Well, and this is why I wrote a commentary that was titled The Non-Conspiracy Nuts. Because, of course, we now have all of these quote-unquote conspiracies that have been fully exposed even within the corporate media. There was the conspiracy to manipulate LIBOR and the conspiracy to manipulate the gold fix. And they're investigating the conspiracy to manipulate currencies. And these are just the conspiracies in the economic realm that have been reported.
Yes, because there's so many more, like the conspiracy to arm Syrian rebels and the conspiracy to surround Ukraine and to topple the elected Ukrainian government and turn that over to the New World Order power, and the conspiracy to go into Iraq, and the conspiracy to go into Afghanistan under false pretenses of 9/11, and the conspiracy to allow poppy production to reach an all-time high. in Afghanistan and now import all that heroin back into this country where suburbs, even around where I live, are being inundated with the New World Order's heroin. And Jeff, now I'm off on a tangent because, again, I'm so damn angry at the powers that control this world that they are now, and I thought about writing an article about this, but I just don't have enough time, so here's the idea. You remember the Poppy Wars? You remember the Opium Wars, thank you, Rory, where the British government wanted to take over China from within using opium in the Opium Wars? That's what they're doing now in this country. They're killing people on the streets. They're killing young people, and they're trying to get young people addicted to the heroin they bring into this country so they can topple us from within. They've done a damn good job already because most people aren't awake, and the younger generation who needs to wake up is getting addicted to their drugs and ending up in their privately controlled prisons.
Well, and that's why I go back.
End of rant.
Well, I go back to the Opium Wars with China all the time because I think that that's the burr in their butt and has been for 150 years. I mean, they've hated the British and by association the Americans because of what you just described, from the Brits and the Anglo-Axis trying to destroy them from within by using their own, at the time it was medicine, and highly addictive medicine, but I mean it does have some medicinal purposes, and that's the reason that I think that they are as quietly taking over everything that they can at this point, because they know that they've got the West by the balls. They've got all the gold, and they have all the manufacturing, so therefore they can dictate a whole lot, in my opinion.
The thing is here is that both sides remember very vividly how successful the Opium War was. China remembers how successful it was being on the victim side of the equation. The Anglo-Axis remembers how successful it was from their perspective in terms of destroying potential rivals and enriching themselves incredibly. And so, of course, that's why we have them running this new global drug cartel through the CIA, is because it's such a wonderful way to make money and destroy other populations, and of course even your own population once you label your own population as quote-unquote the enemy.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And for anybody who thinks that they wouldn't do that, look into Operation Gladio. But all right, so here's the big picture, guys. I mean, they are using the apparatus that the American people paid for now against the American people and against the rest of the world. And we do see China standing up to some degree, aligning with Russia against what this country and NATO is doing over in Russia. And I think that's a good sign. But the flip side of that is that there has to be agreements. There had to be agreements between the Rockefeller, Rothschild cabal and the leaders of China, a totalitarian state, to roll out all those factories and to take all our manufacturing. So clearly there are, behind the scenes deals with China, and what I'm afraid of is that this new world order could succeed. And what we see now with, imagine the Apple iPhone in your pocket, imagine that mind-boggling technology that didn't exist 50 years ago. Well, imagine what they're going to have in another 50 years. Imagine where these drones and this autonomous robot system that they're building, this Skynet, is going should it not be stopped. If this system doesn't fall from within under the weight of its own corruption and criminality and evil, this satanic system, as Jim Willie calls it, imagine the nightmare under which our children will live. It'll make the Matrix look like a fairy tale. It'll make the Matrix look mild by comparison.
Well, of course, when you say Skynet, now you're talking about the Terminator metaphor. But, in that respect, there was an article recently about China trying to purge IBM computer hardware out of its banking system because it knows it's all been corrupted with various viruses and malware, which is what allows all the spying and allows all the hacking, because, of course, the world's great cyber terrorist is the U.S. government.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jeff. I think that there has been a massive overreach and a betrayal upon betrayal upon a betrayal as it relates to these people like Joe Biden and Obama and the people above them at the CIA, the NSA, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the people in control of the Pentagon. They don't know when to say when. And I think these people have betrayed everybody. They've overreached. So they may have made backroom under the table deals with China, but then they betrayed China by, rolling out these types of software packages that wiretap China and wiretap Angela Merkel in Germany and wiretap everybody on the planet. And I think there does come a point where the bad guys turn against the bad guys for their own sense of self-preservation. And at the end of the day, that's all we can hope for. We can only hope that this satanic system collapses under its own criminal weight. And if it doesn't, humanity is screwed.
Well, and this is precisely the point, is, even the U.S.'s so-called friends now fully understand, how much that friendship is actually worth. They get spied on, they get lied to, they get their economies targeted by the bankers whenever they have some, particular machination they wish to perpetrate. And so, the only thing worse than being one of the U.S.'s friends is to be one of the U.S.'s enemies, but it's only by a small margin.
That's so true. That is so true. And I think that is what the rest of these alliances, the rest of these allies are starting to feel. I mean, there's this latest news in this revelation from Russia, from Russian intelligence, indicating that the consortium involved in the events of 9/11, which any truth teller knows was a false flag operation. There's this new leak from Russian intelligence suggesting that it was an alliance between the U.S. government, the U.K. government, and Israel that helped pull off that false flag operation. Now, they've backed Putin into such a corner where if that stuff starts to come out, if that stuff makes it into the mainstream zeitgeist and the sheeple start to get wind of the truth there, then this whole thing falls pretty quickly, because they've built this whole New World Order tyrannical system of the Patriot Act and, Department of Homeland Security, and all of this nightmare that they've rolled out was built on the back of that 9/11 lie.
Well, of course, we see global tensions ratcheting up so extremely right now. We see, the Ukraine operations, which are just basically a thinly veiled attempt to attack Russia. We see the U.S. getting extremely belligerent in its rhetoric against China because of China's supposed encroachment in the South China Sea. And it just goes on and on and on. And, of course, the Treasury's dump. Why did the U.S. government have to suddenly, dump 140 billion of treasuries onto the books of Belgium's government? Because that much in treasuries was suddenly dumped onto the global market, and they needed to soak it up and put it someplace.
Yeah.
So, of course, the other question that wasn't asked by Dr. Roberts was who dumped the treasuries?
Well, we think it was Russia.
Maybe it was Russia, maybe it was China, but it was one of the two. So, this Cold War, which has been getting nastier by the day, is continuing to heat up, and it could blow up into something really large and in the open at any time.
So now, for those who are listening that are new, and I sure hope there are some new people listening, because I know this is a lot to chew on. I don't want to just preach to the choir. This is the type of truth you will not find anywhere else, certainly in the Mockingbird mainstream media. You'll find it elsewhere in the alternative media. But this is the type of truth that people need to digest, think about, research, and come to their own conclusions on. Because what we're talking about here is concrete. What we're talking about here is real. It's quantifiable. And, again, I mentioned 9/11 here a second ago, and I think it's important, Jeff, to just hit this point. One of the litmus tests that I've always had about who I interview and who we trust, one of the litmus tests is, do they understand what a false flag operation is? Are they willing to talk about the use of government false flag operations against their own people? And will they talk about 9/11 in its full context, which includes so many unanswered questions, both for the 9/11 families that lost victims and for the rest of us who've been asking questions like G. Edward Griffin and Stephen Jones and everybody else. There's an endless litany of great people who've done great work, architects and engineers for truth. The point being this: if you will not acknowledge that there are holes, endless holes, more holes than a block of Swiss cheese in the official story of what happened on 9/11, then you are not a truth teller. And one of the people that I have continual issues with because he will not address the real facts of what happened on 9/11 is Jim Rickards, a Pentagon insider. He's done wargaming with the Pentagon. He gets money as a consultant from the Department of Defense, and he constantly is talking about the death of money, and he's constantly talking about gold and silver being the only thing that'll save you from this coming collapse. So it gets a little fuzzy with Jim Rickards because a lot of us will point to him and post his material because he says good things and real things about the state of our money system, but he will defend the official story of 9/11, which makes me know who he truly represents. He is an establishment insider to that degree. I know
Well,
that I'm not getting invited to go do war game exercises at the Pentagon. So you can trust me, guys. I'm no insider, but I think Jim Rickards is, and I want your take on Rickards.
Well, that's the thing. I've particularly noticed him myself over the last couple of years because he's been very obviously put forward as a disinformation shill. And you talk about him saying good things. Well, in fact, I've been looking at what he's been writing and what he's been saying in interviews very, very closely. And in fact, he almost says good things. And, it was really funny because he was trotted out on Kitco several months back to do an interview. And basically, what they wanted him to communicate is the idea that the central banks didn't really care about gold, to the point where they didn't even mind if it rose a little bit in price. Of course, they didn't want him to put it that way. They wanted basically him to put it in an Orwellian way. That I forget how it eventually came out, but in fact he put it in plain English. He did a piece on Kitco that was titled literally, "The Fed is not opposed to an orderly rise in the price of gold." Of course, that's not a message that the propaganda machine wanted to put out. So, like 2 days later, they pull him back to do the same interview, except to rephrase it in Orwellian terms, something like the Fed prefers to see the prices of gold remain consistent, or something along those lines, where he said exactly the same thing, but didn't say the Fed wanted the price of gold to rise. So, it's, and then of course, in an interview before that, he's talking about Bernanke and, blah, 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 and he tries to be a critic of Bernanke to establish credibility with himself, but then he always reveals himself as a shill. And in the previous interview I was looking at, he's nattering on and on about his own views of things, and he's talking about a U.S. depression that had been going on since 2007. Literally 1 minute after that, when he's talking about B.S. Bernanke, he's explaining Bernanke's policies because Bernanke is, quote unquote, afraid that the U.S. might slip into a recession. Well, if you've just finished saying that the U.S. economy has been in a depression since 2007, obviously you can't then go around and say that somebody's worried that it might slip into a recession.
No, that's right. And, I'll tell you what turned me on to this idea that this man is an establishment shill, and he's definitely out there serving the purposes of the establishment to some degree or another. It's when he went on King World News and repeatedly, at least in 2 separate interviews, talked about the fact, this goes back 3-4 years ago, he's talking about the fact that the New York Fed could conceivably seize the gold assets that it holds for other countries to help reback the dollar in a gold standard. He said that, which is World War III. That would be a monetary form of World War III. Now, of course, he said that before Germany demanded their gold, and now Austria wants a gold audit, and all these nations are wondering what happened to their gold that's on hold, and can they get it back? The answer apparently being no, not right now, give us 7 years. But then he's gone on to talk about the fact that just recently, Jeff, you may have missed this, and I made a post about this. He did an interview where he talks about the litany of events that could lead to the death of the dollar, the collapse. He says the collapse is coming, and here's the litany of things that could cause it. One of the things he mentions, he says, a prominent suicide. And then he goes on. And I thought, well, that's really strange. Why, when we know that so many bankers lately have been suiciding themselves, most of them unanswered, most of them ruled suicides with little evidence to back it up, why would he say a prominent suicide could trigger a dollar collapse? That's very strange. And then I thought, well, who on earth could he have in mind? A prominent suicide of who? What one person could have so much gravity and so much importance that the suicide of one person, and when I say suicide, I put it in quotes, that murder or assassination of one person could cause the dollar to collapse. I thought, how puzzling. The man is definitely a puzzle. And then he was on Max Kaiser, and to Kaiser's great credit, Kaiser pushed on this fact that there was CIA-connected, Buzzy Krongard-controlled insider trading on 9/11, and Rickards backed off, avoided, and moved on. And he did not want to talk about it, even though he says that his think tank investigated what happened on 9/11. And yes, there was insider trading in the airlines, but it was, quote, associates of the terrorists. Which, of course, Jeff, is doublespeak, because that's true. That's absolutely true. They were associates of the terrorists at the CIA. At the CIA. I mean, I'm sorry, guys. My feathers get ruffled over this stuff because I am so sick and tired of the lies. I'm so sick and tired of the thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. One of my favorite 10 commandments, because if you can lie about your neighbor, and if you can lie about other countries, and if you can lie about other officials, and if you can build lies about any good person, you can destroy them. And that's really the sin that this New World Order hangs its hat on time and time again. They bear false witness against their neighbors all day, every day. That's all the State Department does. And it truly is a satanic system, as Willie says. It truly is.
Well, and I understand your particular ire towards Rickards because it's the disinformation shills that are the worst of the wolves in sheep's clothing. They pretend to be our friends, while in fact they're just slipping us half-truths all along to always deflect us from getting to the actual answers and questions which need to be put forth on a regular basis.
Well, then let's end with this. What is your take on what Rickards says? Because on one hand, he's saying that the death of money, as his new book is titled, and was really the death of the dollar, unless he wants all money to go away and we're all going to have electronic chips controlled by, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Vatican and anybody wants to lump into this pile of New World Order creeps and criminals. When he talks about the death of money, he's telling people you better buy some physical gold and silver. So that's the message we all identify with, and that's the message that gives him credibility. What is your take on his message, and why do they have him out here saying those things? Is it because, as Willie says, it is part of the satanic system? They like to tell you what they're going to do before they do it? It's fair warning, Jeff. It's fair warning for him to get out there and say, the death of your dollar is coming. You might want to get some gold and silver.
Well, you see, it's not really fair warning because this is how the disinformation game works. When the bankers and of course their pets in government understand that aspects of the collapse are becoming obvious and can no longer be covered up completely, they go into a different operation, their disinformation, and that's a delaying operation. So the thing with people like Rickards and other disinformation artists is when they talk about the possible demise of the dollar or the U.S. economy in general, it's always through a combination of events that are going to take quite a few years to occur. And so, this is the whole point now, is the stalling game. And so they get these shills out here simply to stall. Yes, someday you're going to need to buy some gold and silver because, maybe 10 years from now, the system could fall apart when this and this and this happens, when in fact it could happen tomorrow. So, this is the whole thing, is to deflect the sense of urgency, as well as, of course, deflecting people from the most serious and pertinent questions. So it's distract and delay. And those are the two big D words that go along with disinformation.
Well, I want to just wrap up by just saying a couple of things about Jeff. One of our favorite guests, somebody we've known for a very, very, very long time, and there is nobody that we trust more than Jeff. And Jeff's excellent articles you can find directly on his website, bullionbullscanada.com. But there are also some excellent pieces that he writes on his blog, which is a little bit hidden over there at Bullion Bulls, and he sends me those links, and I post that content also at SGT Report. And I guarantee you're not going to probably find those stories and those articles anywhere else but at Bullion Bulls and at SGT Report. Jeff, any final words for us before we lose you?
Well, yeah, those are some very kind words and tall praise, and I'm probably going to have to work twice as hard now to try to live up to it.
Well, wait 1 second, though. Eric Sprott thinks highly of you, too, because you write for Sprott Money, which I neglected to mention.
Well, I've managed to acquire a few friends over the years, and I'm very happy about that. And they say some nice things about me, and I'm even happier about that. And so, like I say, it's just a matter of working really hard and trying to earn that praise.
Well, I know everybody in this community values you, Jeff, highly, and we do appreciate your voice here today. Thanks for, you didn't know what we were going to talk about today, so I really do appreciate that about you. You can talk about anything, no matter what I throw at you, and I sure do appreciate your voice. Rory, I know you didn't get to say much today. Can you please tell everybody about your latest with the doc? You did an interview with the doc from Silver Doctors, and tell everybody about your website, The Daily Coin.
Well, The Daily Coin, thank you very much for that, Sean. The interview that I did with the doc just came about because of the D-Day coins that he's releasing on June the 6th, which is D-Day. It's the 70th anniversary. And in the interview, we talk about the coins. We also get into the market and talk about Eric Sprott, as far as Eric Sprott has said on numerous occasions in the first half of this year that gold is going to $2,400, and not that the doc or myself want to argue with him or disagree with that, but we do discuss how we think that that's going to happen. We also get into some of the miners and what's going on with that, with the total, where's the supply coming from? I mean, the primary silver miners right now are operating at a loss collectively. There's a $1.5 billion loss on their books for last year.
Well, yeah, and
So,
let me just say, SRS Rocco just did a piece in which he quantified the fact that most of the miners are paying $1 more per ounce for silver to get the stuff out of the ground and into the market.
yes.
Jeff, Jeff, we were going to let you go, but I better circle back on this $2,400 price prediction from Eric Sprott. Now, you know that if the silver fix is truly going to end on August 14th, and maybe the gold fix is coming next, do you think there's a chance in Hades that the gold price can breach even 2,000 by the end of the year? Because I just think this paper manipulation is going to continue one way or the other.
No, I still see hostage markets being the situation here where nothing's going to happen until the whole system comes down. But I want to seize upon what Rory was talking about with the miners and the whole point about the miners operating at a loss here, because here's the whole point as it relates to inflation. You go back just less than 15 years, and the same miners that were barely managing to stay alive with gold at $250 an ounce and silver at under $4 an ounce are now in the same dire financial circumstances with gold at $12.50 an ounce and silver at $19 an ounce. And so the point here is that despite the 5-fold increase in prices, they're still in the same operating loss position. And this tells us, of course, what's happened with inflation really over this 15 years, that in fact our money has lost 80% of its value in the real world over that period of time.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I made this point in the last interview with Bix, guys, and I made the point that if you don't understand the value of 1 ounce of physical silver or 1 ounce of physical gold in your possession at these prices after listening to this discussion, then we can't help you. I'm sorry. We can't help you. We're trying real hard to help you, but and we know the powers that be have beaten you up. If you bought silver at 48 and you bought gold at 2,000, I get it. But we just can't help you if you don't get the big picture. But I know most of you do. I want to thank Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada for joining us today. Jeff, thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Great talking to you guys again.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks, Rory.
Thank you, Sean, very much.
Thank you, sir. And I want to thank each and every one of you so much for tuning in, for hitting like if you did, and for sharing this interview with others. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you all, so you are all doing your part in your own ways, and for that I am also truly grateful. Thanks for joining us, and please consider visiting us at sgtreport.com and leave a comment below the video there at the website. We do appreciate comments there, and thanks to all the regulars who do comment day in, day out. Thank you all, and have a great week.